Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jason with Jadron Aquatics. Thanks for hanging out with me in the fish room today. So today, we want to talk a little bit more about guppies and the care that it takes to take care of them. And we're going to talk a little bit about the truth of are guppies super easy to take care of, and the different pros and cons that go along with that whole entire idea. So when you're talking about guppies, one of the first things that we need to discuss is the big question is, where did the guppies come from that you currently have? That is a big question to ask when dealing with guppies. And yes, the answer is guppies are not easy at all. So first of all, let's talk about locally bred guppies. Now, if you can find someone that's breeding guppies that's somewhere in your local area, that is the best chance that you have to have the most successful guppies, because those guppies are currently used to the water conditions that you're going to put them in. So there's not this big long range of having to get the guppies used to the water. So that would be the best thing that you could possibly do. If you want to be highly successful at guppies, find people that are currently breeding guppies in your area. I promise you're going to save a tremendous amount of time and aggravation. Even if they're going to cost you a little bit more money, you're going to have a lot more that actually survive. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So typically when I buy some of the more higher end type guppies, I know that when I buy these from someone that they most likely got these things in from Thailand. So they're only, say, 4 or 5 days actually removed from being in another country. So I like to pick up at least 2 to 3 trios. Now a trio is 2 females and a male. So if we get 3 trios, we're getting 9 fish. And I expect when I buy those 9 fish that I'm only going to have about 3 or 4 of those live. Yes, even when I know that I'm going to be paying $45 to $65 per trio, I know that I'm going to lose that many. And you're saying, Jason, that's crazy. Why in the world would you buy them? Because that's just what you typically have to go through. Now, I'm not saying that always happens. I have bought multiple trios before that I know that came from Thailand, and every single one of them lived, and every single one of them thrived, and every single one of them had babies. But for the most part, I typically have over half of them die. Even to the extent of this tank right here, these were turquoise albinos. These turquoise albinos, I bought multiple trios and I only had 1 female live. And that 1 female had already been hit. So you can see that all of these came from that single female. So what I've learned, that whenever you get these higher end guppies like this, again, these are not ones that you got from someone that's locally bred or maybe even from the US. These are ones that you know that came from somewhere overseas. Now the biggest thing that you're trying to do is you're trying to get them to adapt to the water that you currently have in. So you ask, what is the best way to get them to adapt to the water that you're currently in? Well, it's not always the easiest thing to do. Now, first of all, whenever you get them in, you might want to check the pH and see how big the pH difference is, because you don't want to run into a problem where you're just dropping them and plopping them into the tank and there's some massive pH swing. Most of the places that I've realized that you get these things from overseas, they typically keep them in a 7.0 or higher pH, which is what guppies need to be kept in. So the first thing you want to do is you want to start feeding them the best possible food that you can. I would suggest that you hatch out live baby brine shrimp. It's just about the best possible thing that they can have. Your next best bet, if you don't want to hatch out live baby brine shrimp, is to get the decapsulated brine shrimp. That stuff has just as many health factors as the live baby brine shrimp, but I have learned that it's not always the best thing to give to some of the newborn babies, because sometimes some of the newborn guppies that you get, they want to see some type of movement in something to be able to hit it. But it usually doesn't take them very long to get them acclimated and get them off of the live baby brine shrimp if you don't want to continue to hatch those out. But understand, that's the quickest way to get your guppies to grow up into full adults, is to feed them that really healthy food. If you can't do that, then move on to some high-end or good flake food, or even better, some type of frozen food that they like. Guppies aren't typically that hard to feed, but what you're feeding them is going to determine how quick you can get them to grow out. But don't overfeed them. Guppies are one of the fish that are known to look hungry all the time. So don't feed them constantly. If you're just feeding your adults, just feed them no more than 2 times a day. Pretty much all the food that they can eat in 1 minute. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about water conditions that they're kept in. You'll see a lot of people that talk about you absolutely have to keep guppies in hard water or you're just gonna lose them. Now, I've had this problem before, but what I finally decided to do because of the success that I did start having is I wanted my guppies to adapt to the water that I had them in, the tap water that I have them in. Because of the fact that I have tanks that I have an automatic dripper, so water is constantly being changed, I want them to get used to that water. If not, I'm gonna have to constantly put additives in every single day to get the water harder than it actually is, because I kind of have a medium. It's not really soft and it's not really hard. So I've kind of got a medium. So it's not really the perfect, what someone would say for guppies, but as you can see, my guppies do very, very well. But they do well typically after about the 2nd or 3rd generation. So the first ones that I buy, again, I may lose half or more, and then the next ones that are born do better because those guys are more adapted to live in my water. And then the next batch that's born, those are the ones that I find out end up being the strongest to survive in the water that I have. So that's kind of the process that I take whenever I have my guppies and get them used to it. It's one of those things that it takes multiple generations to get these guys so that they are going super, super strong in my water conditions. And I know that sounds like a long drawn out process, but that's one of the things that I've really found to be successful with them. You've just got to be patient with these fish to get them used to the conditions that you're currently keeping them in. All right, so now let's talk about what is the optimum temperature to keep your guppies at. I like to keep my fish room at about 78 degrees, so the majority of my guppy tanks are at somewhere between 78 and 80 degrees at most times. Some of the ones that are down lower sometimes might get around 77, but that seems to be about the best temperature to keep them the most stable. If you keep that temperature too high, you're going to shorten the life of those guppies. But one of the things that I do is that whenever I'm trying to grow up the guppy fry, a lot of times I'll remove them out of the main tank that they're in, and I'll move them over into my grow out tank. That tank I typically have it set at about 82 degrees, and I feed those guys about 4 or 5 times a day. I promise you, if you raise that heat up and you feed these guys live baby brine shrimp all the time, 4 or 5 times a day, these things are going to grow extremely fast. And about the time that they're finally starting to show that bigger tail on them, that's about the time that I'll take them out and put them back into the regular tank again, because I don't want to keep them in that temperature too long, because we don't want to shorten the lifespan on them. Now, another thing you want to keep in mind with your guppies is those males, you want them to have those big flowing tails. And one of the things that I've discovered that seems to work the best is you want kind of a heavily planted tank. That way those males can stay away from each other, because if you get them where they're just in a big open tank, you're going to find them nipping at each other's tails all the time. And sometimes it's not even on purpose. Sometimes they'll just be feeding and they'll catch the other one's tails. So I found that the denser that you keep the tank, the more likely you are for them to have just really, really beautiful fins. As you can see, you know, that's what makes a guppy beautiful, is to have that long flowing fin without any type of nip marks on it. The only other way to keep them pristine like that is to only keep just a pair or so in a tank so that you don't have multiple males. But if you're trying to raise up a bunch of guppies, that's almost impossible. But for those people that are actually trying to show theirs, that's what they do. They keep them typically separate from other males so that they can keep that tail looking absolutely pristine. All right, there you go, guys. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you understand a little bit better that raising guppies is not the easiest thing in the world. It can be extremely difficult, and you can lose a bunch, but it's just something that you've got to learn to deal with. You got to learn to find a way to get past it. So if you guys got any questions or comments, be sure to leave them down below. So thanks again, guys, and God bless.